When you think about organizational structures and how companies have been structured, that hasn't changed since the Industrial Revolution, which means that employees have always been centralized in corporate offices. And even though the digital age has come and transformed society as we know it, companies didn't really want to let go of this structure that they've been, that's been holding them in great stead and they've been relying on for 100 years. In fact, that's why when the pandemic happened, a lot of organizations were scared that now this new decentralized structure, meaning employees were working out of the corporate offices, that their businesses would plummet. But guess what? It didn't. And not only that, workers started to realize that they could actually spend time with their families and with people and things that they care about and work at the same time. So now that organizations or the pandemic is, the restrictions are starting to lift in organizations, workers are starting to wonder, well, why do I have to give this up when technology is enabling me to have the best of both worlds? And that's why remote work is here to stay, because it really is more about how organizational structures are finally transitioning into the 21st century.
Of course, there are some managers, some companies a little hesitant to lean into this. They want their employees in the office. How do you maintain that sense of workplace community while leaning into this remote work?
It's a good question. And, when we think about community in general, community is really based off of interactions. And we know in this digital world with all the technology that's available to us, interaction can happen virtually. But I think having said that, the most important advice that I would give organizations really in this remote work environment is to anchor their culture on two things: trust and accountability. For managers and leaders, trust that your workers are going to deliver their work. Focus on the delivery of their results rather than on how much time they're spending in front of the computer or whether or not they're in the corporate office. Allow them to choose what work environment is best for them that allows them to thrive and be productive, and focus on the delivery of their work and trust that that will be delivered. Now, for the workers, trust is a two-way street. So you have to be accountable for delivering your work when you say you will deliver it on the date that you say you will deliver it. So trust and accountability. I think if organizations can hold these two as cornerstones in their culture, that they'll do well in this remote work environment.
So as this remote work continues, what are the challenges that a lot of these employers might face?
I think the biggest challenge that's facing employers is not so much what they'll face in the future, but what they're going through now. Because, when people are faced with change, it's really the acknowledgement and acceptance of that change that is the hardest part. And that's what companies are going through now. So I think it's important to take a step back and understand why remote work is so important to people, especially now in the first place. And that's because when the pandemic hit, we were all really forced to pause and take stock of our priorities and to realize what's important to us, what we value, and be connected with our personal values. In fact, it's not really a coincidence that early this year, when organizations started talking about returning to the office, that very shortly after that is when the Great Resignation began. Because workers started to realize that their companies weren't connected or aligned with their own personal values and priorities. So they had to leave and find organizations that would be. I think the biggest challenge facing leaders today is having to, especially as they're trying to accept and acknowledge and lean into this new change, is to learn how to listen to their people and to lead with compassion and empathy. I think if leaders can hold compassion and empathy as their North Star, they'll be able to navigate through any challenge that comes their way, especially in this new remote work environment.